Hi everyone. This lunch debate is about the COVID pandemic. We consider whether intellectual property rights are hindering the production and distribution of COVID vaccines within low-income countries. This conversation is organized by Metaforum in collaboration with the Inter-Faculty Council for Development Cooperation of our university. This discussion will be held in English because that allows one of our guest speakers to express himself more fluently. There has been a lot of talk in the media about whether intellectual property rights should be temporarily suspended to allow more companies to produce vaccines. How else could we save the lives of all those in all those countries where the pandemic is still devastating? The discussion gained momentum when even the US seemed willing to suspend patent rights. Indeed, on May the 5th, President Biden expressed support for a temporary lifting of intellectual property protection for COVID-19 vaccines. Opinions on the usefulness of the temporary suspension of intellectual property rights for COVID vaccines appear to be divided. The classic argument for the defense of patents rests on the observation that exclusive rights to produce a vaccine are necessary to guarantee companies that their investments will pay off. That argument, however, does not appear to be entirely valid in the current situation because the basic research that led to the development of the vaccines was largely funded by governments. Moreover, several governments have shifted additional funds for vaccine development to large companies. Moderna received nearly $1 billion from the US government at the beginning of the pandemic. AstraZeneca received $1.2 billion, and Pfizer was able to use $454 million from the German government and $30 million from the European government that was transferred to BioNTech, a company Pfizer is working with. Also, starting production before there was an official safety approval appeared to be risk-free because the companies used the so-called advanced purchase orders. On the basis of these contracts, the risks of possible non-approval were passed on the buyer, once again being the governments. And finally, those vaccines were sold to the governments. Only AstraZeneca is currently doing this at production costs, while other companies with a return on investment. And Pfizer is doing it with a return on investment of 1,250%. As shocking as this information may seem, it does not yet constitute an argument that more vaccines can be made available at lower rates once intellectual property rights are temporarily suspended. Indeed, some researchers argue that temporary suspension is not very effective. You can release the recipe for making a dish, but as long as you don't have the appropriate cooks and the appropriate kitchens, having a recipe doesn't really help you move forward. When a patent is released, you don't have all the details to make the vaccine in question. Additional know-how is usually needed if the patent is suspended. Moreover, the discussion should not be limited to the vaccines that have come to the market so far. Some researchers claim that patents are still useful and even necessary for research institutions that develop new vaccines in addition to the existing ones. How else could these research centers motivate companies to finance the expensive trials that are necessary to obtain official approval if these companies cannot obtain exclusivity rights? This is the discussion we would like to explore further with our interlocutors today. Our discussion partners are microbiologist Emmanuel André from the Laboratory of Clinical Bacteriology and Mycology, and Geertruy van Overwalle from the Center for Information Technology and Intellectual Property Right, both of our Leuven University. Those of you who know our guests will probably know that perhaps both are inclined to favor the suspension of patents of COVID vaccines during this pandemic. We have been looking for people who take the opposite positions, but unfortunately we have not been able to do so. So we are happy to make them speak, or to have them speak in a later lunch debate. If you are following this conversation live, you can pass your questions through this YouTube channel. That is why I have my computer with me. But I will pass your questions to our guests. But first, at all, let us give the floor to Emmanuel André.
Goedemiddag. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. Today, I will speak as a doctor, as an academic, and also with my past experience working in other countries, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and try to bring you through the reasoning why I, as an academic and also citizen, decided to stand up actually for changing the rules, the usual rules during this pandemic. As initial disclosure, I want to say that I'm not a legal expert. I'm not an expert in intellectual property. I am neither an expert in terms of production of vaccines. So, first of all, I would like to share 3 examples from my medical experience that I will take from my international experience. First one is in India, 2004. I had to take care in Calcutta of a patient who could not afford care after a traffic accident, and he stayed in a kind of non-care facility for months and months just because the system could not provide him with the right medication. And this medication was actually quite cheap, only a few dollars per day, but the system in which he became sick actually could not afford the system of insurance. So one of the key concepts behind medicine and public health is actually the availability, the affordability of drugs. Then another one, a few years later, I was in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, working in infectious disease pediatrics. And at that stage, it was 2006, antiretroviral drugs just became available and were becoming available after all this discussion around patents, which took years and years. And at that stage, actually, production was not sufficient. And so every day we had to do a kind of triage between the children who were going to receive antiretrovirals and therefore will survive, and the other ones who would not receive these drugs. And usually we had to use as a criteria that the ones who were the sickest were not going to receive the treatment. And of course, I think it's important to disclose this kind of experience because it is quite traumatic as a doctor to have to take the choice not to treat the sickest patients. And then last, a couple of years later, around 2010, I was working in Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there working on tuberculosis. Actually, one of these traumatic events was the fact that despite the fact that treatment for tuberculosis was free of charge, we had a huge number of patients which did not beneficiate from these from diagnostic and treatment because or they couldn't get access to the medical system or because they didn't have the sufficient trust in the medical system. And therefore, I think that in this complex debate, we also need to look at the bigger picture, at the trust we are building between the society and the medical sector, including doctors, including the pharmaceutical industry. So now jumping in this debate of patents for vaccines and COVID, one of the important way that one of the ways I like to look at these kind of complex issues is to have a prospective thinking approach. Where are we going to end up, or where do we want to end up? We are today in a situation where only the richest countries are able to get sufficient vaccines to shorten this state of pandemic, while other continents, and let's look at Africa, a continent with whom we have a historical, very intense relationship, they are still in line of getting their first consistent dose package of COVID vaccines. In the coming years and decades, the African continent is going to represent a bigger and bigger share of the world population. So if we continue as the system as we have it today, we're going to continue a system where vaccines are only produced in Western countries for Western population, and the African continent is going to stay aside. So I think that we cannot start with this ambition to maintain a statu quo. And this is also where diplomacy, but also global health diplomacy needs to enter. And global health diplomacy is not about only securing our own interests, it is also about securing a relation of collaboration, of trust, that would be mutually beneficial. And I think that this debate around vaccines patents has also to enter in that domain. So what is the demand of these non-Western countries today? And you know that the vast majority of the countries are supporting this demand to release the rules, the restrictive rules that we have today, so that they could be able to produce, to use the production capacity that they have today, that they can adapt in a couple of weeks or months to be able to increase the production of vaccines. And that's certainly the case for a lot of European countries, because there are a lot of companies able to help in leverage the production of vaccines, but it's also the case, for example, in Asian countries where they have these companies which are fully certified, which are able to adapt themselves in a couple of months to be able to produce vaccines. And then we have another level. These are the countries in the African continent where currently there's nearly no production, no capacity today. And when we listen at what the African leaders say today, is they say, we want to invest, we want to start from scratch, because we believe that starting our own production lines today, even if we need to put the first bricks today, will be more efficient than waiting and be systematically at the end of the line. So there's one myth in this debate that I think is important to break down. It's a myth of a vaccine, producing a vaccine is so complex that you cannot make it. Well, as a university, I think that this is a statement that we cannot accept. Our role as a university is to make sure that complex processes, complex systems are being understandable, that they can be done by others. Our role as a university is to transfer knowledge, and we know we can make it. And so I think this is something that we need to take into account. And second, there's a myth that transferring intellectual property for productions, for scaling up production, actually would imply releasing all the knowledge. Well, actually, we need to make the distinction between the knowledge that we need for production, for scaling up production, and the knowledge which is much more complex about the knowledge required to innovate, to discover new vaccines, to put new vaccines on the market, on the first clinical studies for the first time. And so these are two different elements, and we're putting everything in the same basket today, what makes the debate much more complex. So there's another point about vaccines, is that we think vaccines are just patented, that like on one vaccine there's one patent. But behind a vaccine, actually there's a network of institutions, companies, public sector, even universities who are behind a numerous amount of innovations which are, for many of them, patented. These patents today for the COVID vaccines, they are in the hands of the NIH, so the public sector in the US, in universities, in what I will name today innovation companies, like when you mentioned Pfizer BioNTech is a typical innovation company which made the innovation, the core innovation behind the vaccine was made by that company. And then you also have these big congregates, these big pharma companies, which of course also work in innovation, and they have fundamental work which is very relevant, very important in the biology of innovation. But actually the innovation from a big pharma perspective is also, and sometimes mainly, putting the hand on emerging innovations made by others in universities and smaller companies. So it's about scouting the right innovations, about acquiring them, about having the means to start clinical trials. These are very, very expensive. They need upfront financing. It's about the experience to bring a drug or vaccines to the market. So all these innovation departments are actually much more complex and do not only include, and sometimes only partly include, the real biological innovation. And then behind the vaccine, there's also a lot of non-patented innovations and materials, the raw biological materials, the packaging and so on. And these, in a crisis such as this one, are also very fundamental, and they can be the bottleneck for scale-up of production. So what is the impact of these patents today in a global health crisis? Well, it's not about blocking scale-up of production. It's about slowing down this scale-up of production. And why? Because in a crisis moment such as this one, all these negotiations from these core companies towards other companies that are willing to participate to the effort actually is a case-by-case negotiation with a lot of delays between each steps, and actually where the final objective in these negotiations is that happen between the two companies is the mutual interest, the interest of companies. And in these negotiations, we tend to also leave aside the sense of public health emergency and this higher level of need. This implies also that we have for the potential producers that are willing to participate to this effort, there's a risk for them because they don't know where the negotiation is going to end up, so they are reluctant to do upfront investments. And so this psychological impact of having a patent reduces the ability and the reactivity of potential partners in this effort. So we should not underestimate that neither. And then there's also a consequence of this. It's about the price, the cost. Today we see that the cost of vaccines, and certainly the ones that seems to be the most adequate at the moment for the response to this crisis, they don't tend to decrease. What we would expect, because the demand is secured, because the return on the investment cost has already been done. Well, the cost of these vaccines now tend to increase, and this shows how the rules that are behind these business models use the scarcity of production as a way to increase the cost. And this is the contrary of the public health objective, which is increasing the production and decrease the cost to make sure that the impact of the pandemic and the equitable access to vaccines is secured. So why, as a medical doctor, I decided to stand up in this debate? It's because also, from a microbiological point of view, there's a huge impact of this prolonged vaccination campaign worldwide. When we have a prolonged campaign and with inequitable distribution of vaccines, actually this allows the virus to continue to spread, to multiplicate, to have and to see some variants emerging. And of course, these variants, they can emerge in all directions, but the ones that will be selected are actually the ones which are always the most transmissible, because we tend to have some rules and social distancing, which makes it difficult for a virus to be transmitted. So the ones who are going to be selected are the most transmissible. the ones who are going to be selected are also the ones who are a little bit different and more different from the original copy, which is the one that we use to produce vaccines. And so the fact that we don't enforce a higher production, an equitable distribution of vaccines, actually will end up decreasing the efficacy of our own vaccine campaigns. And of course, for all these countries which need to remain in a state of pandemic, this has a huge impact. So the poorest countries around the world are actually now entering a phase where they will be day after day, week after week, month after month, in an inequitable position compared to the countries which have had an easier access to vaccines. And then there's also an impact that we need to foresee is that in our Western countries, we know that the anti-vax movement is already very present, but if because of these variants that we're kind of stimulating through this approach, we need to revaccinate our populations regularly, well, this will increase the number of arguments of anti-vax movements to say that, look, they are vaccinated, these vaccines don't work, we need to be revaccinated, and so on, and so on, and so on. And these complotist theories use these kind of elements. So we need to be also very attentive that revaccinating our own populations will become probably more and more difficult. So, and I will conclude progressively. There are two things that I want to bring in the debate. Is one, what is the value of public funding? What is the intellectual property of something that has been funded by the public? So there's a kind of debate there, ethical debate that we need to bring. Because we always think about what will be the incentives for the researcher if we take out the recognition of his research. But we also need to bring in the debate, well, what will be in the future the incentive for the public funding capacities to fund research if they cannot receive back or the perception of return of these investments is not perceived by the wide public. So why would I, as a citizen, agree that my government would support private companies, universities in funding their research if when this research is needed in an emergency situation like this one, well, we don't get the money back. And so I think there's also a risk there about the credibility of public funding. Then the second point is for a university. We always speak about, when we speak about valorization of our research, we always tend to focus on the financial valorization. And of course, I think this is critical, this is very important to support research. We need funds, we need funding, and this has to remain in the debate. But we should not underestimate the social value of innovation, but also the symbol that a university has to be in a society in such a crisis where our ability to innovate also in terms of rethinking the rules in particular circumstances, how this is important. And then I think now I've tried to give some elements in the discussion to be able to start a debate. And I think what is important in this debate is to remain open, to not deny the importance of patents, and in the short term, in the long term too, but also try to bring some more arguments in this debate so that we as a university can also come up with innovative solutions.
Thank you very much. So, Geertruida, you have the floor now.
Hello, goedemiddag. Hello to everyone present here and out there. So I've been invited to respond to the introduction of Emmanuel from a no perspective, no to the waiver. So this morning when I got up, and this has been the case I think for the last month, there's not one newspaper reporting on the patent issue, which is very uncommon because my area has been seen as a very technological niche area. And so now patents are in the middle of international attention. And as you know, yesterday the European leaders have gathered together to discuss this patent issue. And one of our national delegates has said the waiver of patents, une fausse bonne idée. So it's a good idea. So my role today will be not to focus on the waiver of patents as a good idea, which is the role we have attributed to Emmanuel, but I will take the role of reflecting on the waiver of patents as a bad idea. As Bart has said at the introduction, personally, what I'm going to tell and share now is not necessarily my own opinion. But what I've tried to do to provide the necessary input for a balanced discussion is assemble critiques, concerns, which have been put forward by eminent academic research institutions. And the leading research institution in my area is the Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition, who has put up a position paper a week ago. I have been participating in various of the discussions in putting together this opinion paper, but I have not undersigned the paper yet because I have my own doubts and uncertainties, and that's why I'm very interested in joining this debate today. Secondly, I've turned to another eminent international organization, which is the International Association for the Protection of IP. Having said that, I have organized all the arguments in two categories to facilitate the debate later this afternoon. I think there's a few concerns which in my view are factual in nature, and there's other concerns which are legal in nature, and then as a third element, I will present what we need now and what we need in the further future. So as a factual concern, it has been raised that there is no evidence so far that IP rights block vaccination. We've heard lots about the slowing down of production, and it has been argued that is not a result of patent rights being there. So I think we need data, we need research, short-term research, to really document this claim that there is or there is not a blocking effect of patents on development, production, and vaccination. A second concern which has been put forward is that IP rights have enabled collaboration. IP rights have enabled this collaboration between universities, startups, and big pharma. And what we have seen over the last year is a successful production of a few vaccines. So that is an argument which is being put forward against the waiver. We need further collaboration. We need further IP to sustain trust and collaboration for future variants. Third element which need to be put to the test, in my opinion, and which has already been introduced by Emmanuel. So there is a concern that even if we waive IP rights, prices will not decrease. I think that's something which we should be figured out. Is that claim a true claim, yes or no? Fourthly, and that has been discussed in the media and globally, worldwide, but under a different heading. I take the position, and this is my personal position, that the whole discussion about know-how, it's a factual discussion, and we should turn to virologists and experts to demonstrate that you do indeed all the know-how related to those patents to produce the vaccines, yes or no? Because pharma says waiving the patent rights alone is not enough, because you need access to complementary trade secrets and know-how. So in my view, we should not discuss this under the heading of an ideological or legal issue. This is a factual issue which should be discussed by experts and which should be resolved by experts. I want to learn and I want to hear, is this a true claim, yes or no? So these are 4 concerns which need further investigation, which need evidence to remain standing. When it comes to, and a last one is, it's being said that if we waive patent rights, it will have a detrimental effect on incentive for drug innovation. Will that be the case? Will it not? It's going to be difficult to provide evidence that it will or will not, but I would like to hear from the experts in the field whether it will or will not, because this is a claim which is typical in the narrative of pharmaceutical industry. So these are 5 concerns which, according to me, can be discussed and can be denied with evidence, with examination of the facts on the ground. Then there's a series of concerns which are legal in nature. And it has been hinted to already, even if you have the waiver, even if IP rights are being suspended and patents are being suspended, you still need to fulfill all the regulatory requirements to put drugs onto the market. So market authorization, clinical trials, comprehensive comparability studies will still be necessary. How are we going to do that if the bioequivalence tests need to be conducted and if pharma companies are not willing to share their clinical data with potential producers? Secondly, TRIPS does provide flexibilities. That is a matter of fact. We have Article 31, we have the Doha Declaration, but the concern here is that even if you apply the TRIPS agreement provisions do not have a direct effect in the member states. So even if TRIPS underscores compulsory licenses, for example, that does not necessarily mean that 168 member states of TRIPS have a national regime in place which embraces compulsory licenses. Belgium does. Belgium is quite unique. France does, but many other countries do not. Thirdly, and I think this is a concern which I do underwrite and which I do underscore and with which I fully side. If we go for a waiver, if we support the waiver should be made much more clear. Because at this point in time, it is not clear at all which patents would fall under the waiver. And Emmanuel has already hinted to this, what I find interesting distinction between IP rights and patents which relate to the development of the vaccine and the IP rights which relate to the production of the vaccine. I think that might be a very helpful distinction. But even if we restrict ourselves to the second type of patents, it's going to be a huge task to figure out which patents rest on that production cycle, because there's multiple patents. And then secondly, a second issue for concern is that many of those patents, not the older ones, not the ones which are the basis patents which deal with mRNA, but the more recent patents, the ones which have been put, innovations which have been put in place since March last year, at present, they are still in an examination phase. So we still do not know whether those patent applications will make it to solid patent rights. And that creates a lot of uncertainty. And it will become clear within 1 or 2 years whether those patent applications become firm rights, and in the meantime they have a kind of uncertain status. So 3 legal concerns. We will discuss, I hope, all 3 of them. But what we need right now, at this very point in time, short term, and I think Emmanuel has already hinted to it as well, I think we need accountability of the funds which have been invested in vaccine development. And if we want accountability, we need transparency. And I think that is missing. That is missing, not from the side of the government, because the government is quite open on what they have funded, but the companies are not open on this, on their side, on what it costs. And that is an old problem. Well, I think it's about time that there's openness from the side of pharma industry on the real cost, and that we get rid of all the myths about the cost of developing a drug. Secondly, this is a somewhat stronger, more strongly expressed need. There's voices who say, well, before you act, think. So before you put the waiver into effect, look into the possible consequences. That has been the position of the European Commission before Ursula von der Leyen kind of leaned into the invitation of Biden. The European Commission, embracing, so all the EU countries, have decided some weeks ago, we are in favor of the waiver on the condition that you first demonstrate what the effects will be. This is kind of a difficult exercise, but we might take that along in our discussion. On the longer term, what I learned from my fellow colleagues is that they do support, so it's not une fausse bonne idée, but une bonne idée, is the International Pandemic Treaty, which has been put forward and undersigned by 25 countries by now, and where they want to anticipate future pandemics or the further development of the current development to come forward with more balanced provisions and more thought through collaboration with all the partners around the table, big pharma, startups and universities. So this is this pandemic treaty call from some 25 leaders. So I would say that this last one is a no-brainer, and all the other issues I'm open to listen, to hear and to learn.
Thank you very much. I suppose that by listening to each other that you have questions for each other, so perhaps we can start with that.
Sure, thank you very much. I think it's very, very interesting to get your experience, your point of view. And I will start by reacting on the first point, on the last point that you made. It's about anticipating. Actually, what is lacking today is the fact that we could not, and why are we in this pandemic status since more than a year now? It's because we couldn't anticipate enough from a scientific point of view. We were not sufficiently prepared. But what we see today is that also from a legal point of view, we were not prepared. And that's my opinion, and that this unpreparedness from a legal point of view on how to react in a pandemic leads to uncertainty, uncertainty leads to delay, delay leads to additional unnecessary death. And we're speaking really about a pandemic, a deadly disease here, also a disease which has huge social and economic consequences. So I think that these legal uncertainties, the fact that these are still discussed today after more than a year, it really shows a certain level of immaturity. I acknowledge the one of the biology, but I think we also need to focus on the one of the legal context. And one of the important points that I think we need to bring here, and when there's a statement that production is okay and so on, Well, we just need to look at how vaccines are distributed today. It's totally unequal. So if we had the sufficient means, if the system was well prepared, we would be in a situation where production would at least increase at the same rapidity in all continents. So we have a huge problem here. It's that inequality is simply the reflection that the system was immature. Because in a pandemic, one of the key principles is to take everybody together. Because you cannot claim that you're tackling a pandemic when you leave more than the half of the world's population aside. And then there are 2 points related to cost and also to innovation that you made, and I think this is important. I would just take back the example of antiretrovirals. So these drugs that we use to treat HIV infection, in the beginning they were very expensive, and they were under the monopoly of few big pharmas, including the ones that we still see today. And when patents were released, the cost of these antiretrovirals did not decrease by a few percent. They decreased by more than 100 times, and sometimes much more than that. So it's just to say that this impact on cost is massive, and we have the data. We don't need to look at the data from what might happen in the future. We just need to look a few years ago at what happened, and it made a massive difference. And then once again, about impact on innovations. So let's take just Pfizer. Pfizer was among the ones fighting against these patent waivers for ARVs, and among the most virulent. And what do we see today? Despite the fact that these patents have been left aside in the HIV pandemic, is that the same company comes with one of the most innovative products on the markets. So once again, we have the demonstration that from the recent history, medical history, that releasing some patents at the right moment saves a lot of life, but does not have an impact on innovation. This company remained at the top level. So I think it's once again a claim where we use this fear that nothing else will happen in the future, but we show from the past, and certainly we will show it in the future, that innovation actually will accelerate in the future, with or without patents, because we just need it. And the drivers of innovation is not only patents, it's also the social need for innovation and the emergence of new diseases. That's a few points.
I would like to respond to two of your remarks. You said from a health perspective and a medicine's perspective, we were not ready. It was immature, and the legal discussion was immature as well. That really beats me, because I've already written an opinion paper in March last year. There was no interest in publishing that opinion paper, which was saying, look ahead, the future is now. It's now that you have to take decisions on patents and on the use of IP. Now, March 2020. I'm not frustrated that it was not widely published. So I'm not willing to share this because of my personal relation to it. But I was really flabbergasted that during this round of collecting money, where Ursula von der Leyen was having these discussions with the prime ministers from Turkey, from all other EU countries, that nothing was said about what with IP, what's going to happen with patents. So, and I've watched her talk, and I've watched people from pharma talk, and it was all about, we're in this together, solidarity, but there was no commitment as to patents. And I think what makes it really complex is that philanthropic organizations, such as the Melinda Gates the Gates Foundation, is that they have a two-sided, two-coined face. On the one hand, they're being philanthropic and they're giving away and contributing to the solution, But on the other hand, they're part of the pharma industry. And so Bill Gates was against the discussion on patents a year ago. And I think that didn't contribute to the concerns which have been raised then already with regard to the role of IP. This two-coined position of major philanthropic actors. So that would be my response to your remark on the immature legal context. And as to opening up patents, I would like to respond with a counterclaim. And it was, I think it was in the paper today or yesterday or before. You can make a distinction between compulsory licenses. If you roll out compulsory licenses, there is some control on to whom you will license your technology. You could even imagine that you license out know-how under confidentiality rules. Whereas you open up, suspend a patent, you have no control on who is going to make use of access to the technology. And it has been said, one of the arguments against opening up, and if need be, in favor of compulsory licensing, is that China. Why would we open up our technology to countries like China? Because they will have access under the waiver regime. They might not necessarily have access under the compulsory license regime. So what would you respond to that?
So I agree that recognition of intellectual property is fundamental. It's fundamental because we need to recognize where the innovation comes from, and also give a role to the innovators in where this innovation should go primarily. And in terms of releasing all patents, I agree with these arguments which say, look, if we just open the box and throw it away, we lose control. We also put at risk the quality of our work because the copies might not be equivalent. But what you need to know is that there are all these medical agencies at the American level, European level, but also in other countries, which actually have as a role to independently assess the quality of the products and make sure that the quality is equal. So you cannot claim and produce a vaccine and throw it away.
But you give away all the knowledge and all the know-how, etc.
Yeah, and here, once again, I think that in terms of RNA technology, because a lot of the discussion is around this technology, well, RNA technology was in the incubator for many, many years, but it's the first time that we have an application today in the medical world, and that comes at really the right moment. But in the future, I really do not believe that seeing how this new technology has contributed and with very, very limited side effects, with a very elegant biological process, how this will not be copied anyway. An RNA is a small biological substance we have in every of our cells, RNA being produced by every of our cells. So the concept of RNA that contributes to the production of a protein is something that is not patentable. It is patented, but it is not patentable. You cannot claim to patent a process which exists since billions of years in any cell. So, of course, the production and the mimicking of this process can be done through various channels with various technologies, but let us be clear, there are many other technologies to produce RNA, and so I think that we can say, okay, we don't give away all the patents because, I mean, there's a lot of investments behind that and so on, and we kind of work with privileged partners where there's a confidentiality and there are some rules which are respected. And I think this is also an elegant way to move forward. But let's not hide behind the fact that now there are so many companies out there looking at this technology and looking at ways to go beyond these patents, and it's quite sure that they will be able to go in that direction. So let's try to organize this movement to make sure that the medications, the vaccines, and the future drugs that will come through this technology are actually of highest quality, and that this can be controlled. So I agree that we need to move in a direction of privileged partnership and collaboration, and not of this kind of very unpleasant feeling of being stolen from a property.
But okay, can two things. The waiver, if you support the current waiver, which has been put forward by India and South Africa, it's non-discriminatory. It's open to everyone. So if you suggest what I hear you say, that the optimal scenario is collaboration with preferred partners, that will not be the case. It will be open to everyone.
But that's a myth, once again, because I think that someone who wants to jump into production and wants to make sure that what he's going to produce is going to go in the market with the quality standards and with the, like, taking also the reputation of the initial product together, they will want to collaborate. They will want to enter in a collaboration that goes far beyond simply the access to a patent. It will be, it will create new networks of collaborations that will include companies which are...
Coming back to China, the China issue.
Yeah, China should not be seen as the only issue. I think that if we focus on China as a competitor which is unreliable and so on, because this is the mindset in which a lot of people are. I will not give my opinion on that because I don't know simply enough. I don't have any opinion. But when I look at other continents, what these continents need is collaborations, win-win collaborations, where we make sure that in the future, and preferably in the near future, they will be able to produce the vaccines that they need for their population, and they will not be at the end of the line. So we need to find out solutions where, like, if China starts using, if the Chinese population starts benefiting of better drugs, better vaccines, why should this be seen as a threat for the world? Actually, it's a good thing. If their vaccines are not good enough for the moment, let's see how it works, and they would require to get access to this new technology. And just because there are patents, there's more than 1 billion people, I don't mind if they're Chinese or not, do not have access to the best drugs at the right moment. I mean, this is a real ethical issue beyond all the politics. And that's also the reason why I believe that global health diplomacy, and including how we handle patents in the medical sector, has to be apart from a lot of geopolitical discussions, because otherwise we're systematically biased. We're not speaking here about 5G or whatever, we're speaking about life-saving vaccines.
I have a question myself. So you make a distinction between patents concerning the fundamental knowledge and the patents for the production. Now, on the one side you say, even if there would be no patents any longer, the creativity, the innovation would keep on going. It would be still up and running. But what about the production? Because imagine our university invents a kind of interesting vaccine, and it needs to do something with it to convince a firm to do the trials and all these kinds of things. They need to have tools to make them doing this. Would you also say that even if they would just spread it, that kind of information for everyone, and so that everyone can make use of it, that automatically the result would be that it would be produced? Or do we need a patent to control at least that one firm is indeed investing? And especially because you make yourself the distinction between patents for the fundamental and for the production.
So I think that in a stages of pandemic like this one, we need to stimulate innovation as much as we can. And so we need to use also the incentives for innovation, including patents. But a stages of pandemic, once a solution, a really determinant solution, the way out of this pandemic has been identified, there should be a way that another kind of level of rules takes in charge this recognition. We need to make sure that the people, the thousands of researchers trying to innovate bit by bit and to find out solutions and local solutions and so on for the stages of pandemic, of course, we cannot change the system for any kind of pre-innovation that might end up one day with being impactful at the international level. But once this is clear, there should be a way to say, okay, you've done your job, you've been very successful, and we make sure that you're recognized for it, but now other rules apply because like there's a higher level of need, of an ethical need to make sure that everybody has access to your innovation. So it's not an aggressive, it's not aggressivity. These companies should see this as the recognition of their lead.
This is not really an answer to my question. So it's not about just being recognized that you have founded these kind of things. It's also by trying to find finances to make the trials possible so that what you have invented can work for other people. And the whole question is, if there is no restriction on the use of the techniques, will these firms be prepared to invest in these very expensive trials?
Well, this is the reason why we're in such a complex issue. These companies which are willing to take risks and continue to innovate, they need to be sure that their business plan is going to be positive and very positive if they come out with a very positive and useful solution. But the idea of releasing patents under certain conditions or having intermediate kind of solution does not imply that they need to give away all their potential benefits. And once again, I think in these kind of debates, we need to go back to what happened with the antiretrovirals. These companies continued to make enormous profits on antiretrovirals after the capacity of other countries to produce generic drugs. So there are some models out there. I mean, we just need to look at what happened a few years ago. We don't need to reinvent this debate every time.
Okay, let's come back to today and the way the wheel turns today. Universities, our own Leuven Research and Development, our tech transfer office, they're very open and very clear about the fact that in order to find a partner who's willing to take their development or invention to the market, because it's not the mission of a university to bring an innovation to the market. In order to find an actor who's willing to bring that to the market, they look towards pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies are only willing to collaborate with this and other universities under terms of exclusivity. And what KU Leuven does, in order to have some control, is set up agreements in which they, yes, necessarily do agree with this exclusivity character, but where they negotiate that if a company does not put the final product on the market at the reasonable price, they might withdraw from that collaboration. But the initial steps seem to be extremely vulnerable for any collaboration, in the sense that the university is not in the power position to say we choose the conditions under which we want to collaborate with pharmaceutical companies. It's either no or exclusivity. And today, I do not see how or where there is leverage to change that.
I think that indeed, in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of the war, you cannot change all the rules. You need to cope with what you have, and so in this kind of negotiation between a university, ours, which has a lot of innovative potential, and also drugs that were brought to the market, including in the context of HIV, including now with COVID, a lot of effort is being done. So when we look at this at the level of a negotiation between a university with a potential solution and a company which is hesitating to take an important financial risk to see if we can bring that to a real-life solution, well, if we look at that, of course, there's a lot of hesitancy. And the reason why there is public funding, and the reason why there was public funding here, was to make sure that all these hesitations associated with the financial risk were totally mitigated. So these key players received, as you mentioned at the beginning, an enormous amount of money to at least be out of this financial risk.
You know, a suggestion on the long term, and it's a suggestion which has been done in academic circles, legal circles, is to change the regime of clinical trials, to make it a public task, to make it a governmental task. And so it will no longer depend on the willingness of private companies, whether yes or no clinical trials would be carried out. It would be part of one of the roles and tasks of the government. So that might be a better and a more ideal scenario. But we're here today, and so that's not going to happen soon.
Time is already up. In most of our discussions, indeed, when we discuss things, we realize how complex they are, how difficult it is. And I think also in this case, a nuanced picture is quite important, but a little bit difficult to define. So making it easy to say, well, we waiver all the patents is a little bit too easy. It's more complex. It depends on who, for what reasons, on what level, production, innovation. So it was a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.